right, everybody. Here we are in the last hour of the last day. Thank you for joining me. I do want this to be kind of conversational, so feel free to turn on your video and that sort of stuff. Yesterday when I did this session, I just sort of dove in and asked for folks to ask questions. And I think folks were a little shy. So I'm going to do a little bit of upfront content. And again, please interrupt with questions anytime. If we're going down a path that you all have already know, then let me know and we'll adjust, because this is about getting through all of this together. This is your session. We're 8 months in. We're in stage 5, and per the governor yesterday, we're going to be there for at least another month. I have some opinions about whether we should even be in stage 5, but that's a whole other issue. If it hasn't dawned on folks yet, it is dawning on folks that this is going to keep going for a while. How do we survive and make the best of it and go forward, and we do it safely and legally and all that sort of stuff. And one thing I keep telling everybody along the way is you guys are being asked to completely change the way you do your work and what you know, and sort of start over as learners in a lot of ways, and learning subjects you never wanted to know anything about. You didn't want to know law, you didn't want to know epidemiology, you didn't want to know any of that crap. In fact, if you were in the arts, you kind of intentionally avoided some of those things. Take heart. Even the biggest organizations with all sorts of supports are struggling with this time and how to move forward and how to think about it and how to do it safely. So, when I hear folks say, are other people struggling too? Yes, other people are struggling too. This is not easy. And if someone tells you that it is, then walk quickly away, because walk quickly away. So, let's see, where do we start? I have to say this, you'll see it in the corner of some of the sessions. I'm a recovered attorney. Please don't hold that against me. I'm also a once and future musician. So, I am all of these things. But that means that I'm not licensed or insured. And so, I think I know what I'm talking about most of the time, but please, it's not legal advice. And I always encourage all of you to talk to your attorneys, be they expensive or free. And I hope you talked to Scott in this session an hour ago to find out about the free opportunities around the state. So if you're trying to make sense out of all of the craziness out there in terms of whose rules to follow, in this situation that we've been in for 8 months, given that the feds really haven't made any requirements about shutting down or masks or any of that sort of stuff, and they would normally be the top of the rung. For most things, it's state law first. So what is the governor saying, and what is he requiring? Now, some of you live in counties that are having additional orders, right? Or cities that have additional orders. And that is what comes next. So if the governor says you can't have more than 500 people, and your county says you can't have more than 1,000 people, well, that's less restrictive. So you have to go with with the state. Sorry, you have to go with the state. The state is the most restrictive. So that would be 500. If your county says you can only have 250 people and the state said 500, it's the county that you have to follow, because that's the most restrictive. Does that make sense? Whatever's the most restrictive. And so you always, through all of this, you have to pay attention to both layers. And in some cases, there's a city layer too, which would be the next one down, right? And that's going to be especially important over the next few months, because, well, we'll see. What the governor has told us is with the new color-coded system, he's leaning toward county by county changes and restrictions, and less on his side. he's shifting the dynamic, right? So we may see more activity at the county level than we've seen so far. You with me so far? Okay. The next thing I want to make sure that you know, and again, I just want to make sure you know, if you don't have bookmarked in all of this, www.in.gov/gov, that's the governor's page within the state, right? You should have it bookmarked because it is your source of truth on everything from the state level. And I've got 3 things circled on here, and I actually should have done 4, but there you go. The top circle where it says information about the coronavirus, that is where it links directly to where you can get the Indiana Department of Health information, and that's where the data on where things are going can be found, on what the numbers are doing. Okay? Back on track in the middle is where you go, where you've seen all of the pretty documents about stages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all those sorts of things. And they're helpful as communication tools, but I want to be very clear that what you find there are communication tools. It's different from the legal documents. Quite frequently, there are things that are actually being required of you in the legal documents that just are too much detail to be in the back on track. And so you don't want to get caught saying, well, back on track didn't say anything about that. It's generally an omission, right? Didn't say anything about that. So we should be able to do that. Well, if you actually read the whole order, yeah, not so much. There's a paragraph further on that says, oh, and by the way, you can't, or oh, and by the way, this is what that means. And so that's where this bottom circle comes into play. And that's where the executive orders are. And that's where the reading legal stuff is kind of a pain in the tuchus. But I really encourage everybody to read it all the way through whenever there's a change that you hear about in the news or something that's reported in the Star, to go and see if there's a new order in there, because it's truth, right? What's in the newspaper or what's in Back on Track is a summary. This is truth. Does that make sense? All right. The next thing I want to make sure you know is that even though we're staying in stage 5, there are a couple of things that, so arguably we're open, right? There are a couple of things that continue in stage 5, and here, I'll do it there. There are a couple of things that continue. So the mask mandate is still fully enforced, right? The recommendations of social distancing and other safety measures still fully enforce. If you're a business of any kind, which includes all of you, unless you're individual artists, but if you're a business of any kind and you're open in any way, you have to have a safety plan. It has to be written, and it has to be shared with your patrons, employees, audiences, whomever. And it has to cover at least what you're doing about screening, what you're doing about masks, what you're doing about distancing, what you're doing about sanitary sorts of things and hygiene kinds of things. It has to, and it has to be communicated to employees and the public. Now, if you're doing events that are likely to attract 500 or more on the state level, some counties are smaller than that. Marion County is still at 250. You have to have a slightly more detailed plan that talks in addition about how you're going to do capacity limits, how you're going to gather guest information for contact tracing, how you're going to staff it to ensure compliance, in addition to those other things. And it has to be approved by your local county health department before you can have the event. Make sense? The unfortunate thing, and every county has a different workload on this, but the unfortunate thing is the way it reads, it says you have to put the plan You have to submit the plan for approval 7 days in advance. And a lot of us, you're selling tickets, you're thinking, you know, months in advance, and you want to do it months in advance. Not every county is even looking at it until 7 days in advance. That's a problem. If you need to do something, you know, if you need something approved well in advance to be able to do blah, 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 get on the phone with your county health department and talk it through and see what you can figure out. Because, you know, they're managing their workload, right? They're not thinking about the kind of structure you guys are thinking about. They're managing their workload. So got to be talking to each other.
Just to clarify, sorry.
Yeah, please.
The county health board approval is only in the case of 500 or more people, right?
Yep. Unless your county has something else, right?
Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. The other thing that's relatively new in the last couple of weeks is, again, back to the very top of the screen here where it says information about coronavirus. That's where the dashboard is. And here's part of the dashboard. It's got all sorts of things on it. But every Wednesday at noon, this map refreshes and changes. And we're taking a color-coded approach these days. And unfortunately, the colors that Indiana chose for its color coding are different from what other websites use for the color coding. And, you know, it's the Wild West in a lot of ways. And we just have to live with that, right? But what you want to watch for on this is your weekly score in your county. If you're blue, then likely nothing is changing and your numbers are continuing to be okay or improving, right? If you're yellow, then your numbers are going in the wrong direction and they're growing, right? You know, the health officials are going to start talking about preparations for change. If they're orange, it's worse, right? And you should be prepared to hear for the possibility of new restrictions coming down at the county level. And if it's red, and I would expect restrictions. Now, not every county has the same politics about these sorts of things, so that may not be the case. Whatever. But if you see your county in red or in orange, that's the time we should be having conversations ourselves, right? With our board and with our staff and with our volunteers and everybody else about what is the right thing to do and how we need to adjust and how we need to plan, because we're going to have to keep pivoting back and forth on all of this for some time. Does that make any sense to anybody? Raise your hands, questions, all right. A couple of other places to look for. So I look at covidactnow.com all the time. Again, it uses slightly different colors, but it's where I sort of keep track of all of the states and what's going and what's growing around us and that sort of thing. And I tell you, a week ago, there were only 6 or 7 red states.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So a week ago, there were only 6 or 7 red states. Enough said.
Wow.
Yeah. You should watch this. If you haven't poked around the CDC website, you should poke around the CDC website. I know it's tough. I know it's better than it was a few months ago. The information is better than it was a few months ago. Politics aside, forget that stuff. Most of it is everybody's cool with it. Okay, most of it, everybody's cool with it. If you're looking for information and you're just getting used to it, poke around at the main site that's coronavirus. It's just huge banners, coronavirus. If you're used to looking at it and you know what's there, I encourage you to go to this second one right here that says what's new at the end, because every day they're posting every day a running list of what changed on the website that day. And so if you're keeping up, that's where I go every day. That's where I start. That's where I start, is what changed yesterday, right? To see what's relevant. There are so many HR questions involved in all of this stuff, that there are two places that I want you to pay attention to. Um, and that is somebody's phone is buzzing. And that is one, shrm.org. SHRM.org is a national association for HR professionals. It's a membership organization that you pay to access, but they're putting, there's a bunch of stuff behind the paywall, but they're putting out a ton of stuff, a ton of Q&A short articles on a lot of topics that are outside the paywall. So it's a great place for readable, real questions with real answers. All right. Now, if you want to get into the more complicated kinds of stuff, and you may need to, right? The Department of Labor OSHA site has a page dedicated to all of this. And it, again, on legal versus communication, it is your source of truth, right? Thinking like an attorney 101. God help us all. I'm sorry. It's true. We have to be cautious as we read all of the stuff that's coming out every day, and we hear the reporting on it, to make sure that we're that we're trying to read it from a certain standpoint. So, a couple of things that I'd suggest. One, don't rely just on the communications documents as you're making your board decisions. And what do I mean by that? I mean the newspaper articles, or the flashy posters, or the back on track documents that are really communication documents. They're great, but they're not the be all and end all, right? Dates are aspirational. We know this by now. This is something I wrote months ago, and when we were just getting used to, well, we're going to be in stage 4 by, well, dates are aspirational, and nothing is defined until it's defined. Pay special attention all the time to words like may, can, must, or shall. They're meant literally, and words are meant intentionally and specifically throughout. So don't create wiggle room. Well, but they might mean that. Don't create wiggle room. That's not the way attorneys work. That's not the way attorneys who are writing things work. If you see something that says, that has a clause afterward that says, and similar businesses, and things like that, they mean sort of everything at that point that's anywhere even remotely like it, and you should think broadly, right? Always read the whole thing, because what may apply to you may be, you may think it's just up in the front part, but then you get down and there's something specific that's just a hidden little thing down here, that you just gotta keep your eye out, or somebody on your board, whoever, keep your eye out for the details, right? And just always, anytime you catch yourself in your head saying, well, that doesn't apply to my situation, stop, time out, read it again, have someone else read it again, talk to your attorney, because you're making an assumption that may not be correct. With me? I can keep talking all day, but if you start asking questions, I will pivot to questions. Okay. In all of this stuff, as we keep moving forward, I can't emphasize enough: start small, go step by step, slowly, as you build back, as you reopen and restart things. Everybody's tired. This is complicated. And you need to think in terms of sort of early and late adopters on technology. So the new iPhone comes out, and you all know that person who has to get it right away, whether it's got bugs or not. They have to get it right away, and they're just going to live through it and work their way through it. You also know the one that's not gonna get it until the next version comes out, and we know that one's running right. They're gonna go straight to the next version because they're slower adopters. In this case, we need to, now we're talking about risk, right? So the people who are willing to go back as audiences are going to be few at first. And if they have a really good experience, more will come. And if they have a really good experience, more will come. And we build trust back this way. If the first ones come back and they have a bad experience, they feel unsafe, then you have lost ground from where you were before. So that's why I say step by step, slowly, all the time. And always start with the official guidance. What are you allowed to do? Turn to your discipline. The national associations and the unions across our disciplines have, over the course of months, put out some really great stuff. And I can direct you to whatever you need along those lines if you want something specific. There are also places where other states have more information than Indiana and vice versa. And so there may be examples in other states that I can point you to that are helpful. And also, drawing on our peers at this point. None of us need to recreate the wheel because we're all recreating the wheel. So the more we can borrow, the more we can learn from each other, the better off we are. I'm not going to go into this, but know that the research on what's safe to do and what's not safe to do, and the recommendations on what's safe to do and what's not safe to do, particularly in a performing arts context, has evolved dramatically over the last 8 months. We know a tremendous amount more than we knew before, and continue to learn. There's still things we don't know. But what is very clear is it's spread by aerosol, not just the immediate droplets. It's spread every time we're breathing out. If we have viral load, every time we're breathing out through our nose or our mouth, things are going out. And the longer we're in a room together, and the more of us in the room together, and the lower the ventilation of the room together, the more that gets in the air. So everything we're thinking about it then follows with outside first, fewer people, shorter periods, higher ventilation, all those sorts of things. And there's some good information out there about very specific kinds of things that I can point you to. Positive test rate and the infection rate, Suzanne. A positive test rate is, and God, if we have an epidemiologist on the call, I'm going to get in trouble on this one. But so positive test rates are literally about the tests, right? If 100 people take the test and 10 come out as positive, that's a 10% positive test rate.
Okay.
Now, there's a couple ways of calculating that. You can normalize it, which means making it consistent across populations by saying it's 10% per population, or if you have a lot of people taking multiple tests, you can do some noodling around it. But basically, it's if you took the test, are you positive or negative? Infection rate is about how many folks have it within a population. So we're working on different numerators and different sorts of diagnostics potentially. Does that help?
Yeah. Yes.
Lydia, yes, you can have access to the PowerPoint. It's actually already in the SCED, and I also have a lot more on my website that you can access. Let's see. Oh, Tony, let's see. How do you convince others that you would unknowingly pass the virus on to someone who people have never? Oh, Tony, why did you ask me that? That's mean. That's mean. All right. So, thanks. So the mask thing, right? And all the politics on a personal level and all of this and a community level. Many of us grew up saying you don't talk about politics or religion at the dinner table, and now things that unfortunately shouldn't be politics or religion. A couple of, so there is no doubt that the masks are imperfect. Different masks have different levels of protection. But if I have the virus and I have a mask on, I'm putting much more of the virus into the mask than into the air. And the less that gets into the air and the more that gets in the mask, the safer everyone around me is. That's just what it is. And on the flip side, if I'm wearing a mask and there's virus in the air, some of it isn't getting through. And the amount not getting through, again, depends on the quality of the mask and the composition and blah, 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 blah. A lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people have been told other than that. What we know in our corner of the world, and the data has been consistent from early on, is that arts audiences, when they're surveyed, the number one thing they want to see in order to feel safe and comfortable going to a cultural organization again is masks, wearing and enforcement across the board. So, picking your battles, right? On a personal level, you pick your battles, and if you want to convince Uncle Joe that he's wrong, God bless you. If you don't want to convince Uncle Joe that he's wrong and you just want to be safe, maybe you're not going to dinner with Uncle Joe right now. As organizations, unfortunately, you have obligations, and you have obligations to do the best that you can. And right now, the governor has said that masks are required, and so you have to follow that. You are obliged to have a safety plan, and if your safety plan says you have to have masks and you don't enforce that, then you do run the risk of liability because you have a policy that you're not enforcing, right? And gosh golly, what do you do if you say, well, you know, it's Uncle Joe, right? And Uncle Joe is asymptomatic, but he's sick, and now he's in your space. And now what do you do? So who do you convince? That's one question. What is your policy and what are you obliged to do? That's another question. Fair enough? And especially too, we increasingly, we're still seeing that consumers just are not comfortable coming back to some of what we do yet. It hasn't changed much. And so again, we don't have a lot of room for error on messing this up. If something bad happens, a lot of people are worried about liability, and that's a whole other issue. But beyond liability, what's the PR impact if something bad happens for you, right? I mean, what's the fallout on that? Yes, ma'am, Anna.
Yeah, hi. So I have a kind of a specific thing. Our organization, 90% of our organization is presenting live music programs in nursing homes. So as you can imagine, that has been a challenge. We've been watching the CDC, the CMS guidelines. So the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Research.
Sure.
So we've been very clear with writing safety protocols for the outdoor performances that we've done in the summer. We have a facility who said, we've been COVID-free the whole time. We want musicians to come in. And I said, they can't wear a mask when they sing and perform. And you have to have, this aerosol protection, the space-time, ventilation, all those things. She has a cafeteria with a separate room with a door in between. And, I'm not sure about this, but, hanging up a drape and a vinyl, covering and putting the speakers out into the cafeteria, but the musicians are in the private dining room. I'm not sure where I'm going to land on this, and I have to go meet with them on Monday and say, is this really going to be safe? They're going to have their residents 6 feet apart, and there's only going to be 10 of them, and they're going to be 15 feet away from the doorway that's going to have this vinyl covering in it.
What kind of instrumental is it? What kind of musicians do you have?
Singers, you know, mostly singers, guitar, keyboard, just acoustic mostly, but just through a little amp.
So your instrumentalists can, in fact, wear masks.
They can't, well, not if they're singing.
Why not?
Many of them are older, so they don't want to.
See, there we go.
I've had some interesting conversations with our artists. Some of them, I mean, singing, pulling the air through the mask is difficult too, and I get that.
Well, it depends on the mask, right? And you know, there's unfortunately there are a lot of perceptions out there too, right? Because really the early on people talked about carbon monoxide and blah 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 blah, and you can't breathe, and it's just not true. It's just not true. And we've seen some opera performances in places with people wearing masks. Granted, if somebody legitimately has COPD or those sorts of problems, it may be a different question. And I'm not a doctor. I don't even play one on TV. So there's that. I can point you to, you may know already, but I can point you to some of the guidelines that have emerged over the last couple of months from the unions on some of these sorts of things. But for singing, if we're going to focus on singing, we're not talking 6 feet distance anymore. We're talking more like 10 or 12.
Right. That's what we're doing. Yeah.
Right. And we're talking about short periods of time with extended periods of time on breaks for the air to clear.
Right.
Now, but you need to know very clearly from whatever facility it is what their air changes per hour are and what their filtration is, and if there's any difference on one side of that wall or the other side of that wall, right? And what's recirculating or not, because are the two sides of those walls actually the same air or are they different air, right? So the question about the face masks, the face shields, as far as the mask mandates are concerned, those do count as masks. So from that perspective, yes, the face shield counts. From everything I see from the engineers and the physicists and those sorts of things who study air quality and all that sort of thing, they're only valuable if you're like spitting at each other and catching the spit, right? The aerosols just go out and completely irrelevant. Yeah.
I have a suggestion actually, and I'm a former opera singer, and I have a lot of friends who have masks specifically for singing. So they have like a structure inside.
Yes.
Yeah, the mask doesn't actually touch your face, so it doesn't have that effect of like sucking against your face.
Yep.
So that could help.
Yep. And you know, there's some good protocols at some of the conservatories at this point too, and on some protections and kind of thing. So happy to talk to you offline and give you some stuff, but singing is of course the hardest of all of this right now, right? So I've got this up here in part because of what's been headline news over the last couple of weeks. Do folks understand the sort of the incubation and sick timeline? It's kind of confusing, right? So you know, somebody jump up and down and stop me if I'm just beating a dead horse on this. But so this is actually taken out of some Johns Hopkins training on contact tracing. And that that yellow line in the middle is, that's when we've got somebody who's sick, who's actively sick. All right. Now, up to 14 days before
Oh, wow.
is when that is the window in which they could have been infected, as many as 14 days back. That's why when we quarantine someone who's exposed, we go 14 days forward from that last contact, because it could take as long as 14 days to show positive. Now, you're not going to show positive on a test saying that you've got coronavirus 14 days back. You're going to, somewhere forward is where you're going to have enough of it in your body that it shows up on the tests. Now, the average infection timeline is 5 days. So 14 days is the outside, and that's why it's the window. The average is 5. It can be as little as 2. So that's the backward. What we absolutely know, what we also know is if on, let's say on day 14, person tests and is sick and has symptoms, they started being infectious 48 hours beforehand. See, this is why it's the masks are such a concern, right? Because you're more potentially most infectious 2 days before you feel sick, and in the immediate days after, in the first immediate days after. Now, so then going forward, how long are you sick? Well, we know that there's a wide range of that. If you are asymptomatic and you just took a test, then we're looking again at the next, at sort of that 2-week window, because, you know, who knows what'll happen. If you have mild illness, then the isolation for sick, I for I, isolation for sick. The isolation protocols will say that, and they've changed a couple of times, but you should stay away from everybody for at least 10 days since the symptoms first appeared, at least 24 hours with no fever without meds. That was 72 hours for several months. They've shortened it to 24. That makes me nervous, but I'm a nervous Nelly. And symptoms have improved. All of your symptoms don't have to go away, but you have to be fever-free and symptoms improving, and at least 10 days.
Oh, yeah.
So that's the 10 days versus 14 days conundrum that is out there. And of course, if you're living with somebody who has it and you're exposed, then it gets more complicated than that. But does that make things any clearer? Okay. You want to talk about vaccines?
Sure. Are there any?
Well, there are a whole boatload in process. There are a whole boatload in process. And there are increasingly ones, here, let me go back to here. There are increasingly ones that are they're moving into the later stages of trial. And right now, and there are a couple that have slowed down. And Operation Warp Speed, I know it sounds ridiculous. It is important. It is doing an enormous thing that we should all be applauding, and is just remarkable in its scope and scale, and the way things are coming together, both for trying to accelerate the research process and then ultimately the distribution process, which is even larger. So we have a number that are moving forward and are showing some possibility. And so the question over the coming weeks, and where the fight is at this point, is when a vaccine that is well into stage 3 looks like it is making enough progress, whether it will go through, what level of approval will it go through. So there's the emergency approval kind of thing that people are a little worried about. There's the folks that have been arguing that nothing should be approved that doesn't have at least a 50% efficacy. So at least 50% of the time it prevents the virus from becoming the disease. That's being argued about right now in some corners. And so when you hear the politicians say, if the CDC tells me it's okay, or so-and-so tells me it's okay, there's a difference. A lot of that is about that particular argument. Whether we've gone through the final phases of the research and at what level of efficacy we're allowing to go forward. So, do I know when a vaccination is going to be available? No, nobody does right now, except for maybe particular insiders. The whole plan is for something before the end of the year. There are some that could reach that. There's going to be a fight over what gets approved and what doesn't get approved. But once something is approved, we know that the distribution process that is being talked about and planned in an extraordinary detail across the country for distribution is one in which critical folks get the first wave, critical populations get the first waves, multiple waves, before the rest of us get it. So let's say that January 1, there's a vaccine available. The first folks that will get it will be critical infrastructure. So healthcare, right? Or national security kinds of things. And then those at increased risk for severe illness, but primarily the ones that are going to get those first are going to be nursing home kinds of things, and then roll out from there. So congregate settings are more important than individuals. Sorry, but as it goes out. And so the upshot being that those of us, middle-class suburban types, run-of-the-mill types, it's going to be quite some distance between approval of the vaccine and regular access to it. It's going to be months in between. I just don't see any way around it, and everything I read says I don't see any way around it. So is that what questions about that? Y'all good?
So far, so good.
So far, so good. We're coming up at 5:20, and if you've got questions, I can stop any old time and just simply ask questions. So please have at. The flu season. What the heck is that thing in front of me, Sarah? Please, what the heck? So I took the Indiana flu data for the last 10 years or so, and tried to see what the arc of the cycle is. I can't find my pointer. So this dark green line and the green space underneath it, you see that? The dark green line and the green space underneath it. Whoops, sorry. That is, shoot, come on. There we go. That is the sort of a 10-year average of how the flu evolves. And if you look at the bottom in the middle, it says January. So that's where the first week in January is. So what that looks like, that bizarre hump thing, is over a series of years, and all the other lines show you just how much variability there is in that. You go back 10 weeks or so is when it generally starts to rise. And where are we now? So 10 weeks back, December, November, halfway in October. That's where we are. Starts to rise. And then it peaks sometime around January, or you can see in some years it peaks later in February or March. The dark blue line was last year. It peaked later. And it dropped off precipitously, in part because everybody went home. And stopped leaving. So get your flu shot. Everybody around you, get your flu shot. And you know, the good news is folks are hoping that the more masks people wear and the more flu shots they wear, and that we're still working from home, is it's actually has the chance to be a milder flu season because of that sort of stuff. But that's up, yeah, now I sound like Dr. Fauci. It's up to us on that. But just again, as you start to plan, keep these sorts of things in mind as you start to think about the winter and folks being inside. Anything on anything? Yeah, that's the stuff that I brought to play with. What other questions do you have? And I mean anything. If I don't know the answer, I can try to find it for you. In all seriousness, I want you guys to be successful in surviving all of this. It matters to me. So, what other questions you have? Things that confuse you in all of this? If you know, what's a contact or I don't know. What questions do you have?
I have some questions about disinfecting.
Yeah.
Both, I mean, I feel like hard surfaces, non-porous surfaces are a little bit more straightforward. But I run a small like startup opera company, and we're planning to do all of our performances virtually, so no audience concerns there. But we're looking at how to disinfect our set because we're hoping to double cast. So, you know, disinfecting between singers and our set is mostly going to be made of porous materials, mattress, bedding, that kind of thing. Like how do you disinfect that?
You know, the soft surfaces and the porous surfaces, those are the issues, right? And you know the difference between cleaning and disinfecting and sanitizing? Do you know?
Kind of fuzzy. I know there's
kind of fuzzy. Okay. So cleaning is dirt, right? Dirt, crud, scum. And you gotta clean before you can disinfect or sanitize, because actually the dirt can protect germs underneath it, and you can sanitize up here and you can still have germs underneath it, or so I'm told. And so what we're trying to do is get rid of germs, and so we need to clean first, and then we need to disinfect and sanitize. And you need to make sure that you're using chemicals that are on the EPA list as approved for killing coronavirus. It's a long list. I can get the link for you.
Right.
You want to make sure that you're taking something off of that. You want to make sure that you're following the instructions on it, because wiping down a counter with a wipe like we might do at home on sort of a daily basis, that ain't sanitizing. It ain't doing it, because what kills the virus is how long, depending on the chemical, how long it is in contact wet. So how long and so some of the things you'll find on that list can kill within 2 minutes. Some of the things on that list take 10 minutes wet, right? So know what you're using and plan appropriately. And of course, if there are fumes associated with whatever you're doing, please protect too, because we don't want to create new OSHA problems on top of the ones we've already got. So that was a long way of avoiding the soft surface question. You know, I want to double check, and I want to look at some of the Actors Equity or the SAG-AFTRA protocols on some of that, because they've gone into more detail, because you know they're on some of those sorts of things. Yeah, I want to do that, but you know, between here and there, think about how you can, if any of the soft surfaces are coverable by something impermeable, think about if you can dedicate to specific people, and so there's not cross use, those sorts of things. You know, isolating and that sort of thing helps as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah. What else?
I have a question, Sarah. I'm just curious, when we start to have these public gatherings, how critical is it to have like a record of people's temperature before they come into the event or activity?
A record of temperature. And are you talking about public, or are you talking about, okay. So here's the thing. If you're keeping a record of people's temperature with their name and information, you've now created a public a medical record. You don't want to do that.
Oh.
Okay. I just was curious because you see, anywhere you go these days, you always initially, maybe not everywhere, but like I feel like that's kind of a thing, is that you take that information down. So I didn't know if that was something that like a nonprofit organization needed to be considerate
You need to
of.
talk to your attorney about some of these sorts of things, or pull on some of the resources. But so here's the thing. If it's anything that ties a person to specific medical question or specific medical data, or so I'm told, is a medical record. And on the employee side, that means that it has to be kept private and separate from employee records. And there are records there's just a whole level of things that you need to do at that point. And so the advice I've received, and again, ask your own, is that you want to have as little of that sort of thing as humanly possible. Now, what we're conflating on some of this is, yes, if you don't want to write it down, is part of the question for someone in the chat. There's a difference, and it's not quite the same for the public, but there's still privacy expectations, and you could get in sort of privacy trouble in other sorts of ways. The difference is, so why are you doing that? Are you trying to facilitate contact tracing, in which case you really only want to know who was there when and how to reach them if you need to?
Oh, yes.
Right?
Okay, so you're saying like
You don't need any of the other stuff.
Yeah,
right?
so even just having a sign-in that would dialogue or like record those visiting would be enough.
Yep. And
Okay.
separate from, I certify that I don't kind of thing. And again, talk to your insurance agent, talk to your board, talk to your attorney, make sure you tick and tie these things, because this is real. This is real, right? And how long you want to keep it. I've talked to some folks who have said, well, we're only going to keep it for 2 weeks because then we would know for contact tracing. Well, yeah, no. Watch the news and how long contact tracing actually takes, right? So you want to be very cautious about keeping the least you can for responsible contact tracing if need be, versus all this other sort of stuff. And so, if you want to ask questions of folks before they come in the door, and just not let them in the door, just don't let them in the door. Mm-hmm. Right?
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, Suzanne, sorry, you had a question.
No, I don't. I wanted to answer what Heather just said. We're doing in studio black box for 10 people in our new space, 10 feet, 10 feet from the 10 people to our dancers in mass, etc. When the people that we have selected, when I say public, I mean they were handpicked. It's not, we didn't open up and sell tickets, not like that. But when they come, we tell them they're going to get their temperature taken. And we take it, and if it's high, they don't get in. And we take it before they get in the door. And then we ask those questions, same questions. I have an employee that stands out there, and the same question. And they're all masked, and everybody has been so appreciative of it. Now, mind you, I'm talking 10 to 12. Now, crew, they're taken way before. And we have the air exchange. Sarah knows all about that I made them change all of the new stuff.
Dan's my hero.
Yeah, and but I've not had any problem. Nobody has been angry, nobody, but I don't write it down. All I do is I know who came. I check, 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 check. And then when I go back, I the next day I thank them for coming. So I've made contact. I thank them for coming, and then I do the next night's group, you know. So I'm just staying my conversations going, but I just wanted to share that with you.
No, I appreciate that.
Thank
That's a good way to handle it, I feel like.
So it is 5:30, so technically we're done, but there are a couple other questions out, and I'm happy to stay on for a little bit longer. Suzanne, thank you for everybody who's been here if you go away, but if you still have questions, I'll hang on for a bit. Suzanne, my dear.
Thank you. I have a question for the group. If they have suggestions regarding producing quality sound performances over Zoom meetings. I'm on a regathering committee for one of our organizations here in Greencastle, and they have a concert coming up, and we have not been getting good results with broadcasting sound music over Zoom. In particular, we have a fabulous organist, and his sound is just coming across very compressed and tinny and not anything like what we're actually hearing. And we do have the original sound feature on to compress it as little as possible. Does anyone have any suggestions for broadcasting live music over Zoom?
Oh, that's a pretty complicated kind of thing, because it's all about it's about microphones, and it's about internet connections, right?
Bandwidth, yeah.
Yeah, it's about a lot of sort of thing. I do know
Okay.
some folks are doing it though.
Let me ask a question in response to Tony's suggestion. Does anybody notice a difference in terms of sound quality for music between Facebook Live and Zoom? I think Zoom is compressing the sound unusually, and we're just not getting a good result. If anyone has any experience with that and can offer a suggestion.
You know, I actually, you know, yesterday, were you, if you participated yesterday when Pam did the sing along, she had everybody keep their stuff off in part because of it's difficult to line it up.
Yeah.
I actually don't know the answer to the question. I don't know. Does anybody else out in the?
We've been experimenting, but we're still having a lot of loss of quality, particularly with the organ, which King of Instruments is probably the most difficult to record because there's 1,000 pipes and they're all resonating at the same time, and Zoom wants to just totally compress it, so it winds up being really muted and muddy sounding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I see Tony.
Anna.
I just heard about Adagio. It's like Adagio, but spelled with an I. It's a streaming app. And I happened to catch Gil Shaham and performing something classical and doing a conversation with a host. Instantaneous. His sound quality was incredible, and it came off instantaneously what he was playing. So I'm not sure. I've never heard of it before. I just stumbled on it today. So I'm going to do some more research on that one. But
yeah, and again, yeah, there's so many questions popping through my head about mics and intakes and outtakes and the, you know, what happens after production and that sort of stuff. So, all of which I can guess about, but really, it would be making stuff up.
We've been working on the problem for several weeks, but I just wondered if anyone else had experience to share that might be helpful.
Got it. Tony, I wanted to follow up real quick because you had the question too. Yes, your employer can absolutely ask those questions, can absolutely take it down. They are within their right to do that. It's the EEOC and the Powers and Department of Labor have all made that very clear. It's just a matter of how they're handled and the privacy considerations after that in an employee standpoint. And the reality is that most of you are small enough organizations that you're just better off having as little to do with that as possible, because HR on a normal day is hard. So that's all.
Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
Tony and I are members of one of the same organizations, and after months of having Zoom meetings, we opted to have our first in-person board meeting, just right before the last spike. I think maybe there were 7 people present. And if the full board, including the past president, is there, I think we have 10 members. Let's see. We tried to socially distance everyone, wore masks. We, used the sanitizer on the table before and after. But is there something that we should know about or be aware of? I know that since then we've had another spike and people may be hesitant to meet in person again. But are there things that we should share with the other board members in terms of concerns and the things that you've, shared with us today?
So you did the first few things right? Small group, spaced, masked, sanitation. You also want to think about how big the room is.
Yeah.
You want to, forgive me, great big ass gosh darn room right now. And you want to talk with the facility about, if it's a facility, about what their ventilation is. You want at least 6 air changes per hour is what's being recommended.
Don't know about that. Okay.
Right. And then the last piece of the puzzle is, how long are those meetings? Right? How long are you in that confined space together? And you know, if you used to have 3-hour meetings, you probably want to get down to 1 for right now.
It's been a little over an hour, hour and 15.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Shorter than usual.
Yep. No, I mean, I have already facilitated some retreats in the last couple of months, and where we've had, people 8 feet apart with masks and breaks and ventilation and all that sort of stuff. And but it's I saw a graphic the other day that I wanted to share. It's like the Swiss cheese approach. You do one thing and some stuff gets through, you do the next thing and some other stuff gets through, but eventually the layers, all the holes are sort of off from each other and they catch everything. So distancing is not a panacea, masks are not a panacea, but you start to layer on these things, and with every layer it gets safer. So
sounds like we need to check about the ventilation. We had set up additional chairs so people could be adequately spaced apart, but they voluntarily sat closer together. Yeah. And I guess the last thing is, and particularly in the performing arts, and what the unions are requiring on the national level kind of stuff is, God bless us, you need to assign that bossy hall monitor of the group to be in charge and say, no, get yourselves apart from there. You need to embrace your inner hall monitor and have someone whose job it is. Yes, we want to keep everybody safe for sure.
Right. Absolutely. All right. Well, so here's the deal. So the slides are up in the Who's What's It. My website has more. You can email me or call me any old time. This is important to me. Gosh, I wish you all the best in it. And thank you so much for coming to listen to me babble.
Thanks for a great session. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, good to meet you all.
You too.